Okay, hello there. Back with another review, and I want to review a book called His Own Man, A Victorian Hidden Muslim, The Life and Times of Robert Rashid Stanley. And this is by Christina Longden. So let me tell you a little bit about this book. So the sort of backstory of this is, and this is a true story, that the author, Christina Longden, her brother, back in the 1990s, decided to become a Muslim and embrace Islam. He was a white working class lad from one of the northern towns in England. And as you can imagine, at that time, being from that background, he didn't know anybody who was like him, who had taken the step that he had. And it was probably a bit of a lonely, tough kind of way of being. So anyway, fast forward to maybe another 10 years down the line, and his sister and his dad decide to do some digging into the family tree, just as people do. And what they discovered, to their shock, was that their great-great-grandfather, maybe 100 years before, had not only taken the step of becoming a Muslim himself at the age of 70 or 69, but was actually one of the pioneers of British Islam. As well as that, he was a very prominent figure in life in the area of, what was the area called? I've actually forgotten what the area and the place was. Oops. He eventually moved to Liverpool. He was living in Manchester, and he was, oh my goodness, I can't believe I've forgotten the name of the place where he grew up. It was called, he was the mayor of Stalybridge, the mayor of a town called Stalybridge. So let's read about it just on the blurb on the back. Robert Stanley was a respectable northern working class Victorian man who converted to Islam, but his family managed to keep his Muslim identity a secret for nearly a century. Robert grew up in the cradle of Britain's Industrial Revolution and was part of the Christian Israelite sect. Self-educated, this grocer and tea trader made it his mission to help northern working men bribed by rich factory owners during elections. He rose to become one of Britain's first working-class magistrates and mayors, witnessing firsthand some of the most violent riots, radicalism and progressive reforms of the Victorian era. Robert was committed to justice for all, even when his public challenges to an unfair British foreign policy drew national condemnation. In 1898, at the age of 69, he took the astonishing decision to convert to Islam, becoming close friend of the famous convert Abdullah Quilliam, Sheikh al-Islam of the British Isles. After his death, his conversion was hidden for nearly a century. Always his own man, Robert Rashid Stanley's life and times are brought into the light for the first time thanks to the painstaking family history research of his own descendants and through the words of his great three times granddaughter, Christina Longden. And there are various people here who have written commendations for the book. So I read this book, and I've got to say, there's so much in this book to pack. With Robert Rashid Stanley, and he was called Rashid, that was his kind of nickname. If he hadn't become a Muslim, his life would still have been remarkable. He became the mayor of Stalybridge. He was self-educated. He was a justice of the peace. He became a tea merchant. Built his own money. Ran a pub, by the way, even after he was a Muslim, which is a bit strange, but there you go. And then he eventually, at the age of 69, left Stalybridge and went to Liverpool, where he was part of a group led by a group called Abdullah Quilliam, or Robert Quilliam, I think Abdullah Quilliam. And he was probably the most famous of the Victorian converts or reverts to Islam. They started the first mosque in Liverpool. It wasn't purpose-built, but it was the first mosque in Liverpool. And, with that mosque, they had an orphanage. They had various outreach programs for the poor. So they did lots of other things. Robert had quite a reach because he even wrote to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and he even commissioned, or at least was partially responsible probably, for the commissioning of the first English translation by a Muslim convert, Marmaduke Pickthall in the UK. So what can I tell you about this book? So first of all, it's absolutely fascinating for anybody to learn about what life was like in Victorian Britain in a northern town at that time, because most people think it's like very dull, grey, children going up chimneys and being stuck in factories. And yes, that did go on. But what you realise is there was a lot of vibrant, society was really changing. On a lot of fronts. There was a lot of religious upheaval as well. Robert actually initially came into contact with a group called the Christian Israelites, they were called, and they believed in a return to the Mosaic law, circumcision, keeping beards, a lot of things that you'd associate with modern day Islam, or Islam full stop. And you wouldn't expect that in a place like Bradford you'd have people coming out proclaiming to be prophets of God, but that's exactly what happened at the time. There were people that called themselves prophets of God and started up these new kind of religions, and some of them were women as well. So there was a lot of religious colour to the area, which you don't normally expect. That was one of the things that happened. Also, there was a lot of change because the American Civil War was finishing. Slaves who were picking cotton weren't available in the same way. And the cotton industry, which is one of the mainstays of the economy of these places, was falling down. And there was a lot of poverty, a lot of rioting. Robert Stanley was a man who, back in those days, became a justice of the peace. And Christina Longden writes about, how he dealt with a lot of the people that came into his courtroom. And the fact that he had a good heart, he was very compassionate, especially to a lot of women who were now stuck on their own, and a lot of them turned to drink. So he was really, I think the idea of the dangers and evils of alcohol was something that was really large in his mind, and that might have led him to become a Muslim, actually. So it's great in that, and then there's some great pictures in this, and they show you pictures of the first mosque in Liverpool, and the inside of it, if you can see from this, is amazing, because it's got a church organ or a mosque organ in the corner, and the congregation sang hymns. So it was a very kind of British kind of expression of Islam. And so that's really quite interesting, and it's probably very different from the mosques that we see nowadays. But I've heard that they've actually renovated this mosque in Liverpool, and I think you can still see this. And the mosque in Liverpool is somewhere in, what was it? I think it's number 11 and 12 Brougham Terrace, Brougham Terrace. So it must be there, and obviously it's probably kind of a bit of a museum piece now. But there was an orphanage with it as well, and the other thing is that he moved eventually to Manchester near an area called Rusholme. He met more Muslims there, but oddly enough, one of his next door neighbours around about him in the street was a lady called Emily Pankhurst. And Emily Pankhurst was, of course, one of the pioneers of the suffragette movement, giving women the vote. And this was a big, big deal, because up until then, not just forget women, but men didn't have the vote. You only got a vote if you were only allowed to vote if you owned your own property. So often what would happen is people would have, there'd be block votes, and people would vote as a block, and one guy would vote for kind of everybody. So a lot of changes happened. Emily Pankhurst fought for women and the vote, and he probably did come in contact with her. So there was a huge amount of social activism, religious activism, and things going on at that time. So that's the book. His Own Man, a Victorian hidden Muslim. Oh yeah, and obviously he became Muslim, but then was hidden by his family for about 100 years afterwards. So obviously it was, the reasons for that aren't quite clear, but they think maybe it was just something people wanted to keep quiet. Maybe there was a lot of issues going on with the Ottoman Empire and the First World War, and I think maybe at that time they just thought it was like today. Sometimes Muslims are seen as being a fifth column. People are a bit suspicious, so I think there was some of that going on, and I think his family just decided to keep things quiet. But it's a great book to read. It's a great to give you a window into that time in the Victorian era, and it's a great book to read about somebody's kind of personal journey and how it was somebody who was genuinely self-made, and the idea that, there's a reason why Britain became great, and part of it is because people were socially active in ways that a lot of people aren't now. So this is a good book. I recommend reading this. His Own Man, a Victorian Hidden Muslim, The Life and Times of Robert Rashid Stanley, written by Christina Longden, published by Past Truisms. Okay, thank you. Hope you enjoyed that.